Hello, my name is Lauren Fletcher. I'm a doctoral candidate in the College of Education and Human Development. Thank you for your interest in attending my presentation today. This qualitative study examined my children's literature course taught in spring 2020, in which 25 undergraduates read Ghost Boys, a challenging children's text. Ghost Boys captures the experience of Jerome, a 12-year-old black boy shot and killed by a police officer. Told from Jerome's perspective, Ghost Boys describes his life before and after the shooting when depicted as a ghost and he can see the aftermath. The novel opens a window on racial injustices, police brutality, and the killing of young black boys in the United States. Rachel, a pseudonym, was one of 25 undergraduates enrolled in the course. As with other students, she was reluctant to read this particular novel or engage in the course activities associated with the book. She sent me, the instructor, emails asking to be excused from the novel study, sharing her frustration and uneasiness in reading the text. Her uncle was a local police officer, and she felt the novel would be a direct attack on him. Ultimately, Rachel decided to participate, and by the end of the novel study, sought ways to get involved in the local community's Black Lives Matter movement. This article focuses on Rachel's experiences as she engaged in the novel study. Specifically, the study explores the following questions. How do pre-reading activities and discussions on a challenging text about racial injustices support an undergraduate's critical literacy development despite their initial reluctance to engage the text? And 2, how does challenging text engender a transformative change in students' attitudes to thinking and actions on racial injustice? This study is framed in current scholarship around challenging text and critical literacy, which informed class activities and supported further discussion of the findings. Challenging text provides students tools needed to participate in a pluralistic world and expand their perspectives on how to create a just society. Entering the text activities are seen to create opportunities for readers to explore and approach challenging texts and topics at their own pace, promote respect for said topics, and is shown to alter the physical, emotional, and thinking space for readers. Challenging texts are one way to foster a critical literacy perspective. This perspective calls on readers to attend to power, position, and perspective in all text. While studies emphasize the importance of challenging text, showing ways to introduce students to these topics, while also stressing the importance of critical literacy, a gap in the literature exists on the experiences of students who are reluctant to engage with these texts present in challenging topics. This study seeks to fill that gap and offer a glimpse at what is possible when students, hesitant to enter these books, are provided space and agency to approach said texts. Using cultural historical activity theory, also known as CHAT, I investigated Rachel's experience. CHAT shifts the unit of analysis from the student to the activity system in which the student engaged in learning. An activity system can be made up of several small actions, with all those actions working to attain a desired outcome. For example, a pre-reading activity may entail several actions geared to foster connections between readers and the text. With the unit of analysis being the activity, CHAT recognizes multiple components that influence and are influenced by one another. Ugi Engstrom displayed this idea using a triangular model to represent a single activity, such as a pre-reading engagement or a book club discussion. Each node of the triangle represents a mediating component of the activity. The lines connecting those nodes illuminate the dialogic nature of activity and highlight how each component mediates the others. For instance, the president of a book club, the community, could influence how a book, a tool, might be read, while a book might also influence the investment or interest of a book club. This presentation looks at a 2-week book study on Ghost Boys that took place towards the end of the spring 2020 semester. While all students enrolled in the course were invited to participate in the study, this study focuses on Rachel's experience. Rachel, a white female undergraduate, describes growing up in a mostly white neighborhood, and as mentioned, her father was a member of the local police force. While Rachel's experience does not represent those of the other participants, her experience is remarkable considering her extreme transformation in understanding racial injustice. Her story offers a glimpse of what is possible when we introduce reluctant students to challenging text. This book study took place online over 2 weeks. First, students inquired about challenging texts and their role in the classroom. They then engaged in a virtual version of the Cordell. The Cordell is a pre-reading activity where students are presented with visuals, text, and infographics connected to the story for them to explore at their own pace. Artifacts included in this Cordell were Emmett Till's funeral, a short video interview with Tamir Rice's mom, and an informative slide on both the Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter movement. After the Cordell, students reflected in writing and then verbally in small groups on their experience with the Cordell and topic. The following week, students read Ghost Boys on their own, and in the subsequent class sessions, students engaged in small group peer-led discussions about their overall impressions and thought about the book. To investigate Rachel's transformative change during this 2-week book study, I collected sources related to her thinking and learning on Ghost Boys. Data therefore included in the analysis was her journal reflections, my email correspondence with Rachel, transcripts from the small group discussion she participated in, and field notes from the online class meeting. To examine Rachel's evolving understanding of racial inequality through the Ghost Boys engagements, I used the data analysis spiral to define codes, identify possible patterns and themes, and critically assess my interpretations of these codes. My data analysis led me to sort codes by themes rooted in chat and to create triangular representations of Rachel's activity systems, which included her pre-reading engagements and the book club discussions with her peers. This analysis led me to two main findings. The first major finding describes how Rachel entering the text led to an evolving stance. Though hesitant to first embark in this novel study, as Rachel engaged in opening discussions and partook in the cordel, her attitude towards the novel and police brutality towards Black boys shifted. Chat provides a graphical heuristic to understand and represent Rachel's shift in stance towards Ghost Boys during the pre-reading activity. As the figure demonstrates, the subject of the pre-reading activity is Rachel, with the object of the activity being building connections between the text and her own life to prepare for reading Ghost Boys. Primary tools for this activity included Rachel's personal history, the Cordell PowerPoint slides, an attitude of disinterest entering the module, an excerpt from a class reading of the book Challenging Texts, and the time and space provided in the online lesson. The rules that regulated Rachel's actions and her roles in this activity are listed below. Something interesting to note is the initial community members invested in Rachel's pre-reading activity were the instructor and her book club, who relied on her doing this model to enrich their later discussions. Yet, throughout the activity, her sense of community expanded to include people beyond the classroom. This is evident in her reflection in which she wrote, "I am in a position where I can use my voice to help the community. I can tell my family and friends, even my neighbors, about what I learned so we can work together to make a change." The "we," written in all caps, indicates that Rachel views the activity as more than just a class engagement, but an engagement rooted in citizenry. All these factors shown here mediated Rachel's change of stance through various tensions among and between each component. Within any activity system, tensions are not seen as deficits or problems to be solved. Instead, tensions are a driving force of change within an activity. This was evident in Rachel's case, as various tensions illustrated in the graphic by the dotted line fostered a transformative change in her thinking towards both the novel and racial injustices. Denoted by letters, there were four main tensions that drove this change. The first tension, denoted as tension A, between the tools and roles, highlight how Rachel's initial feeling of disinterest and her personal history made it difficult for her to complete the initial reflection questions. This initial tension partly explains Rachel's disinterest in engaging in the novel study, preventing her from fully meeting the activity's object. Next, tension B represents a circular tension within the tools component. While there can be tensions between various components, Chat also looks at how elements within a component can cause strain on an activity. This tension demonstrates how Rachel's connection with her uncle as a police officer and her prior knowledge of police officers' duties conflicted with what she saw in the Cordell. Specifically, reading about the origins of the Black Lives Matter and the Blue Lives Matter movement, in addition to seeing a video clip of an interview with Tamir Rice's mom, Rachel felt conflicted. While wanting to support her uncle, the items in the Cordell made her upset at how some police officers approached Black boys. In a discussion with her peers, with audible sniffles, she shared, "I love my uncle and all the men with work with him, and well, I just can't imagine, or I guess couldn't imagine other officers doing this. But like that interview, oh my goodness, I mean, Tamir, he was 12 and it was a toy gun. I don't know how to feel." As the conversation continued, her classmates further discussed this tension. They comforted her, saying it's possible for her to love and support her uncle, along with the local police force, while also wanting justice for the killing of these boys. Tension C between the tools and the subject represent an additional difficulty for Rachel in thinking about her white privilege and position in society as she read infographics and news articles about racial injustices in the Cordell. As evidenced in her reflection after the Cordell, in discussions with myself during member checking, she expressed feeling upset and having the wind knocked out of her. She described feeling, quote, blind to many of the world's injustices due to her privilege. In particular, she talked at length about a statistic represented on the Cordell, stating Black students were 3 times more likely than white students to be suspended from school for the same infraction. Finally, tension B demonstrates a tension between Rachel and the larger community, as she considered her civic duty to fight for racial equality. Yet she felt unsure of how to do so. In her reflections, she wrote, quote, "What can I do? River City, a pseudonym, isn't perfect, as no place is. I want no need to do something, end quote. This tension was not necessarily resolved in this activity, but fueled future activities within the book study. Though these tensions initially placed a strain on Rachel's willingness to engage, they led to transformative change in her perspective of racial inequality and deep engagement in the novel study. Due to these string of tensions, Rachel's activity outcome was a newfound motivation to read Ghost Boys. This led me to finding 2. Though Rachel shows a transformative change in her attitude regarding Ghost Boys after the Cordell and finishing the book, a further investigation into her book club discussion made her thinking more salient to a local level. While the Cordell disrupted past ideologies and cultivated new beliefs around racial injustice, it was the support and sense of camaraderie among her discussion group that empowered those beliefs to turn into actions. This model here depicts the activity system from her small group discussion. The first major tension was the constraint Rachel and her group felt between the rules of the discussion and the object of forming a deeper understanding to the text. Feeling supported from the group, Rachel abandons the prompt of discussing the story's themes and shares her experience reading the text and disclosed her unawareness of the Black boys' narratives featured in Ghost Boys before reading it. Picking up on Rachel's comment, Hannah, a group member in the College of Education, shared how the book made her consider future students she might teach and how she saw Jerome as a student that got away. Subsequently, the group abandons the official rules of the discussion and, to an extent, the object set forth by me. Instead, the group spent the remaining 7 minutes considering how the local community is affected by racial injustices. And as Gary, a group member, posed to the group, what then is our responsibility? Hannah's experience and Gary sharing information on River City's Black Lives Matter movement further shaped Rachel's thinking and future actions. In her final reflection, she wrote, I kind of thought about this book being relevant to my community and the way we all had to work together to end this. But it's more than that. It's not just violence. It's about injustice happening to Black boys in our community and schools. Jerome might be fiction, but his spirit is not. This is not just a national issue, but a local one. It could just be a matter of time until Jerome is here in River City. From talking about and making sense of her reaction with her peers, Rachel went from reacting to responding to the novel. Shortly after the killing of George Floyd, Rachel shared with me via email that she was inspired to activism in River City's efforts for racial equality. With friends, she engaged in protests and marches for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery within the community. These friends included class members who were equally moved to participate, further demonstrating the transformative power of reading in a community. Additionally, she began a book club with her mom, aunt, the husband of the police officer, and 2 friends, first reading Ghost Boys and later reading The Hate U Give. In our final email correspondence, she wrote, to imagine I almost said no to this whole experience. I would have let my fear and partly ignorance stop me from being a part of something so much bigger than myself. Though reading challenging texts is often fraught with difficulty and reluctance, as seen with Rachel, it has potential to lead to transformative changes in a student's thinking and actions. Though the study took place in an undergraduate literature course, similar experiences could occur in middle or high school humanity classes. Through introducing challenging texts, while providing students spaces and agency to wrestle with these topics, there is possibilities for students' ideologies and actions to shift towards wanting to create a more just world. While Rachel's transformation seems extreme and is an extraordinary case, every shift and change in students' thinking is something to appreciate. Challenging texts afford tools needed to participate in a pluralistic world and encourage expanded perspectives on creating a more just society. Exploring these texts demands student agency and space for tensions to unfold, since it is through these tensions and student choices that lead to the aforementioned positive outcomes. Critical literacy development cannot be forced or compulsory. For example, a change in Rachel's thinking or action cannot be mandated. Instead, students need agency with these activities to develop their own critical literacy skills. Furthermore, educators can never be certain what activity components may impede or foster student learning. As we saw with Rachel and the Cordell, there were certain artifacts that resonated with her more so than others. Therefore, it was important for Rachel to have options and, again, agency in deciding what she wanted to respond to in light of the resources she brought to the activity. Again, though Rachel's activity may not be representative of the entire class, her case highlights the importance of introducing challenging text and not shying away from tensions. Thank you for attending my presentation. Here are my resources, and if you'd like to continue this conversation, please reach out.